What's up, RotoViz?
Welcome into the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. It is the Week 14 Start Sit Show, and this is the money week, man. This is the week where a lot of dreams are going to come true or die an untimely death when it comes to the big redraft contests at MyFFPC, or maybe you're not sweating lineup decisions and you're just sweating out entry into the tournament rounds of a best ball format, something like that. No matter what, I mean, you've got some interests here and some of the projections for the most controversial start sits of this week, and maybe even have some Thursday night start sit conundrums that you've got to get addressed. Dave and I definitely fit into that category because we've got a main event team that's fighting for a title tonight that has a Pittsburgh Steeler situation going on. We've got a Fantasy Pros Championship team that we co-owned with a listener, and we've got a start sit conundrum there affected by Thursday Night Football. And then we've got all of our own individual lineups to look at. We're also taking questions, so if you've got your own lineup conundrum that you're dealing with, post it in the chat. We'll get to it in a few minutes after we selfishly take care of our own teams first. So Dave, we're just going to do two. We're going to do two, man. We're gonna do two, and then we'll be kind of doing the rest of our lineups in the background while we help out the listeners here tuning in. I see we already have some questions flowing in, so thanks, guys. Okay, so the first big one, Dave. This is RotoViz, Curtis and Dave 3 on FFPC. We already locked up the regular season title with this one, so we're just playing for extra money. And I mean, I want that money. I want that money, Dave. So,
as do I. Yes, it would be nice.
Out of the interest of our listeners, let's just deal with the dilemma of the Steeler and Patriot and not go over this entire lineup. The big decision we have to make in this game, we have Ezekiel Elliott on our bench, and we have Deontay Johnson on our bench. And I tweeted out the other day a game split where Deontay Johnson actually has been far more productive with Mitchell Trubisky than Kenny Pickett over the past couple of years. And then we know Ezekiel Elliott should get some increased run sans Ramondre Stevenson. If we were going to play Zeke, it would likely be over Bryce Hall because we're not going to sit Christian McCaffrey or Kyron Williams. If we're going to play Deontay Johnson, it would be over Cortland Sutton or Adam Thielen. So I need your help from the GLSP here, Dave, so I can set this in.
Sure. So what we will take a look at here are the distributions that we have. You'll actually see, Curtis, that Elliott and Johnson, it's a fairly similar distribution, especially at the high end. Where you can break that tie a little bit is there's more of a downside for Zeke than there is for Johnson. If you look in the 10 to 15 bucket, what you'll see is that 37% of Johnson's matches finished in there, just 20% of Elliott's. So you see about 17% more in the buckets that we're more interested in for Johnson than for Elliott. So
let's take a look then. I want to add a layer to this then, because I certainly have no problem sitting both of these players in this game. But you know how it is, man. This low game total automatically means that 70 points are going to get scored tonight. Like, that's just how it works. But let's look at Bryce Hall and Adam Thielen, because Adam Thielen's facing the Saints, who've been pretty stingy to opposing wide receivers. If we have a downside case for either of those guys, then we can worry about putting Zeke or Deontay into the lineup. But if we're not worried about these two players, then I think we can just move on to our Fantasy Pros lineup.
Sure. So what you see here, again, this is a pretty similar one, Curtis. Slight advantage for Adam Thielen in the 15 to 20 bucket. Bryce Hall with an advantage in the 10 to 15, which means... And then actually you kind of see a swap between them at the 5 and 10. The average here in PPR scoring for Thielen is at 8. Bryce Hall, it's just at 7.7. So you have Thielen facing off against the Saints. You've got Hall against Houston. The GLSP does not necessarily help us make that final decision there. So we almost kind of have to think about what game scripts could look like as we try to make that as well.
Yeah, I think the fear with the Jets and the Texans is that the Jets get boat raced. I mean, and if I'm looking at the NFL Stat Explorer matchup analysis tab here, the Houston Texans have allowed just the 24th most rushing attempts over the past 5 weeks, the 27th most rushing yards, and the 28th most yards per carry. They haven't allowed a rushing touchdown over the past 3 weeks. Joe Mixon last got into the end zone against them. They are allowing top half of the league in receptions per game to the running back position. But we did see Dalvin Cook get a little bit more involved again in this backfield last week. We've got the switch back to Zach Wilson. I mean, I hate the idea of sitting Breece Hall, but no opposing running back has rushed for more than 62 yards over the last 4 weeks or eclipsed 12.5 PPR over the last 4 weeks.
What I can also add to that is that in looking through the passing game matchup rater stats last night and working on part 1 of the article, this looks like a pretty good matchup for Adam Thielen. He performed very well when the teams met. I believe it was in week 2 last year. Matchup rater likes his chances. So sitting Breece Hall does not feel like something that we're hoping that we would be doing this week, but I think that we might be doing so in favor of Thielen.
So okay. So if we say that we're going to rank Thielen over Breece Hall for this week, then I think we now then have to compare Breece Hall to Ezekiel Elliott and Deontay Johnson. When I look at this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, well, one thing the GLSP does not know is that Ramondre Stevenson's not playing.
Correct.
So I think it might be worth looking at Ramondre's projection as well, just to kind of anecdotally or directionally have an idea what's going on. And while you're doing that, I'm looking in the matchup analysis tab here on Zeke. The Pittsburgh Steelers over the past 5 weeks have allowed James Conner and Derrick Henry, who both are a little bit more in that kind of ground pound category at this point in their careers. Both of them eclipsed 19.2 points in the past 5 weeks. The Steelers are allowing the 14th most rushing attempts. Have allowed 4 rushing touchdowns in the past 5 weeks. And it seems like a little bit of a better matchup than the Texans for opposing running backs of late, to be honest. And if we look at Zeke's actual recent performance, he was RB15 last week. It wasn't pretty, but he had 17 rushes for 52 yards and he caught 4 balls for 40 yards. I mean, this could be check down city, no Ramondre. I mean, I kind of like Zeke over Breece. So that's my takeaway. Let's see what you found on Ramondre and the tool here, and then we can discuss Zeke versus Deontay again.
Sure. So Ramondre and Zeke actually with a fairly similar outlook when you look across their distribution. So both players would be favored over Breece Hall based on the GLSP this week. The other thing that I do want to take a look at,
combine some of that, right? Because I mean, we're not really splitting the opportunity. Okay.
Correct. You do have 50% of Stevenson's matches finding the end zone via rushing as well, which I think would be another thing that you could point to. I personally don't feel too great about New England's offense's chances in this game tonight. Of course, I am somewhat clouded here being a Patriots fan. So I would let you, kind of steer us there if you think that Johnson over Elliott is the way that we want to go there, assuming that Breece Hall is out of the equation, which I think that he is.
Yeah, I mean, it's ugly, man. It's ugly. Like, it's so weird to think about starting Ezekiel Elliott in a money matchup, but we can't just go with the names anymore. Like, I mean, we just haven't gotten much from Breece. I mean, he had the huge game in week 5 and we haven't seen much. I mean, we really haven't seen much since then. He's basically been a 10-point per week guy. He did score against Buffalo back in week 11, but it's been really pedestrian. Like he's been a no ceiling, RB 2-3 floor for the past month and a half now.
Yeah. All right. I think it sounds like we're going Elliott.
I still can't make myself feel good about it, but I think we do it. Here's the additional context here. So if we look at the matchup, we are favored. We're favored by 30 points in this matchup. Our opposing manager has Kyler Murray on bye and is going to have to start Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. So I do feel good about Zeke's volume floor this week. So let's just not pass up on that. Okay. And then I think we can leave Deontay out and not put our faith in Mitch Trubisky.
Yeah, I don't feel compelled to play Johnson, so I think that works. So anything else that we need to?
Yeah, let's look at our Fantasy Pros Championship team real quick, because I think we have a George Pickens decision there, and I think
there's probably a lot of people wondering about George Pickens, right? So
yes, and we have some Deontay questions in the chat as well, so we'll have to probably stay. And we actually have Pickens questions in the chat as well, so now we're going to get 2 birds with 1 stone here.
Sure.
Jalen Warren question and Jacoby Myers as well. So now we're kind of getting into the Thursday night game. On this team that we're talking about, Dave. If we were to sit George Pickens, our only options right now would be Josh Kelly or Royce Freeman or Jeff Wilson, because we've got Christian Kirk, who we got clarity on now since the waiver. The waiver process. And so we can make a bid for Sunday. I do have a bid in for us on Michael Gallup as a potential, hey, if Brandon Cooks got hurt or CeeDee Lamb got hurt, Gallup would have a lot of value in the playoffs. So I'm adding him to kind of replace Christian Kirk. So for me, it's kind of like, do we like Pickens or Gallup? I think would be our decision. I'm comfortable that we'll win the bid, and then we can answer X for Y Z zeros question.
Okay, so we want to look. I'm sorry. Then we're looking at Pickens versus
Michael Gallup.
Okay. So that one, fairly similar, although you actually have a bit of an edge for Michael Gallup, which I was not expecting. A lot of that comes because 46% of Pickens matches went between 5 and 10 points. He also had 33 underneath 5. Gallup had 36 under 5, but just 32 in that 5 to 10 bucket. He's favored by 0.1 points in terms of average. Now, I don't think that you're excited about playing either of those, and you're kind of splitting hairs there. The one thing I think that you could point to is that there's a lot more reason to feel like you could kind of get a touchdown for Gallup or something like that as an ancillary piece of a better Cowboys offense than what you might see from Pickens and the Steelers tonight. But I'm not firm on that.
I want to play Pickens.
Gallup. Okay.
I want to play Pickens here. I think he's a higher value option in the offense. And over the past, I know it's weird kind of digesting this, but the Patriots have actually allowed the 4th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over the past 5 weeks. They're allowing almost 16 receptions to opposing wide receivers per game. And I would like Pickens over Deontay to score a touchdown. And this is just a different equation than the other one that we were looking at here. These are both kind of tertiary options at best in their offenses, but we've seen Tyreek Hill, Jahan Dotson, Michael Pittman, Jalen Hyatt, and Keenan Allen. So kind of a wide spread of talent and fantasy efficiency this year, all get to double-digit PPR over the past 5 weeks. So I like rolling the dice on Pickens here for our particular team. Now,
all right, cool.
Now let's look at Pickens versus Jalen Warren and Jacoby Myers for a listener.
All right, so let's take a look at Pickens and Myers first. Jacoby Myers, I think, is the clear favorite here, given what you see from the GLSP. I would have him as the favorite as well. So I don't think we really need to drill in too much more there on Myers, unless you want to pause the brakes there for a second. I mean, drill in more on Pickens. I think it's going to be between Myers and Warren.
No, I mean, I think it's okay. Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, Myers has been very, very steady. He did have his best game, very steadily involved in the offense, I should say. He did have a month where he was less effective, but he had 679 and a touch last week against the Chiefs, or his last game against the Chiefs, rather. They're on bye last week. So he looks to be back on kind of that early season track. I'm fine with that. Jalen Warren, I think, is going to be a tougher call.
Sure. Yeah, and it is, because you do see in an average outing, Jacoby Myers getting to somewhere around 10.5, Jalen Warren at 10.1, but there is a little bit more upside for Jalen Warren when you look beyond 15 points. So I think to help us kind of break that tie, I want to take a quick look at Warren's individual stat line. Around 30% of his matches scored rushing touchdowns. They averaged about 12 attempts with 50 yards in this matchup with New England. I think that probably lines up with what you might expect. If we take a quick look at Myers here, his average stat line would show us that only 20% of his matches found the end zone against teams like Minnesota on about 4 receptions and 48 yards. So this is a very difficult one to break, Curtis. If I were forced to choose here between these guys, it's half PPR. So actually I probably should have been looking at those numbers. It's super close, but I think I'm going to give the slight edge to Warren.
I was going to go Myers, so I think we're split here.
But I was kind of on the fence, so I think that we could say the answer for this listener is probably Myers then.
Yeah, the reason I'm going that direction is we did see a little bit of a shift in the Steelers' offense last week in the first game without Matt Canada. It looked like they were leaning back into Najee Harris as a little bit more of a 1A. It had kind of become a split committee a little bit, but we saw Harris get 16 carries and 3 targets. Jaylen Warren had just 1 target and only about half of the carries. We think there's a low total points for this game tonight. And I think, the Raiders game is going to be a different environment. So, if we look at the actual matchup against the Patriots specifically, they've allowed the 29th most PPR per game over the past 5 games, just 16 points per game allowed to opposing running backs. And in their 3 last games specifically, they've allowed 14.7, 8.8, and 9.2 total to opposing teams' running back rooms, not just the lead running back, the running back rooms. That does include a game against Saquon Barkley and Austin Eckler. So, we basically would have to bet on Jaylen Warren scoring a touchdown. I would rather bet on the volume that Jacoby Myers is going to get.
Okay. I think that's the answer then for this listener. All right.
Next one here, sit one. We got to sit Godwin, Deontay, Elijah Moore, or Gabe Davis. He's leaning towards Godwin. We can dial up a little bit of help on this. That's kind of my gut here too. And mostly just because, we haven't really seen, we haven't seen much upside from him in like 7 weeks now.
It's been a while. In fact, if I just pivot over here quickly and we just do a simple exercise, go to the graph tabs on the Monday review tool, pop in PPR, and then pull up Chris Godwin, what you're going to see is not a lot of points. In fact, since week 9, he's been under 10 points. Maybe he matched it or somewhere around there in week 11, but really we have not seen any of the above 10-point performances from him since week 8. So he's definitely been kind of stagnating. The passing game matchup rater paints a decent outlook for him this week. It's a little bit better than what you would see from Mike Evans. But I think I forget if I wrote about them last night or not, but my kind of takeaway was, and I'm still not really sold, even if you control for the matchup, that I really like Godwin as a trustable option this week. We've talked some about Deontay. I know Elijah Moore has a pretty good matchup, even with the quarterback situation there. I think that he actually has a better look this week than Godwin and Gabe Davis. I don't think I'd want to pull out of my lineup. So I'll let you kind of share some thoughts there for a minute too.
No, I'm fine with Godwin here as well. I'm looking at his weekly stat explorer. He's actually only finished above. He's only finished as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 twice in 12 games this year. In his previous matchup against Atlanta, he scored just 12.6 PPR, which doesn't sound very impressive, but that would actually have been more than he had managed in any of the past 5 weeks. He really just seems to have been kind of phased out as a primary option. This Buccaneers offense is really just driving through Mike Evans and Rachaad White. And I think the K is dead on with that when I see a little bit more upside for all of those other players. I'm going to go out of order on the questions here just to make sure we hit the Thursday night ones. And we'll come back around. So need 2 between Bryce, Keaton Mitchell, and Jaylen Warren. We've already looked at Bryce, Keaton Mitchell, and Jaylen Warren. Let's look at Keaton Mitchell. I would be Bryce over Jaylen Warren, but we just need to look at Keaton Mitchell here.
Sure. Let me pull that up quickly. So we got Bryce Hall, Keaton Mitchell. Oh, wow. Look at that. It's already in there. Keaton Mitchell actually is favored in the GLSP this week, as pointed out to us earlier in the chat. We talked some about Bryce. I think that for Keaton Mitchell, if you take a look at his individual outlook, we might be able to get a little bit more context as to why some of his players hit the top end you do see 40% of his matches finding rushing touchdowns, limited target potential, but 54 yards on 11 attempts. And in total, Curtis, it's only 13% of his matches going beyond 50, beyond 15, but we didn't see a lot of upside for Breece Hall this week. That said, I take a look at the outlook for Mitchell against the Rams. We talked earlier about Hall's outlook against the Texans, I believe it is. I'm still not, based upon this, going to move Breece Hall to the bench in favor of Keaton Mitchell.
Yeah. So where are you on Keaton Mitchell versus Warren?
I'm probably, I think, leaning Mitchell over Warren.
I think I would too. They're kind of similar plays here, but I like the Rams matchup just slightly better. And if I look at the types of backs that have been able to get the production on the Rams lately, Aaron Jones and Jerome Ford having a handful of receptions. Actually, over the past 5 weeks, the Rams have allowed the 5th most receptions to opposing running backs. Now, we haven't really seen Mitchell get a lot of volume, but he has had some big plays on those receptions. And watching that Browns game against the Rams, they did give up a couple chunk plays to running backs, but the Browns, for whatever reason, just wouldn't commit to the run. Pierre Strong had a nice bursty run as well. So I like Mitchell to have a couple chunk plays, and I'm just not sure if we get that out of the Pittsburgh Steelers backs tonight. I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, that's why, there's a show dedicated to this. We can't offer any guarantees, but Dave and I are both saying Bryce and Keaton here.
Looks like he's also got Jaden Reed. So let me just quickly pull up Jaden Reed just to give a little bit of context here, because Reed actually has been a fairly useful player. I've had a couple of weeks where I've had to pop into the lineup, and he hasn't.
I've been starting him.
Yeah,
I've been starting.
6 targets, 4.1 receptions by his matches, 30% finding the end zone for 47 yards, a PPR average, Curtis, of 10.9 points, which isn't bad, and a somewhat decent distribution, getting 16% between 15 to 20, and does get 10% of his matches beyond 20, just 14% under 5. And I think that actually, if we look at all wide receivers this week, Jaden Reed probably coming in somewhere as like a fringe wide receiver 3. So you could certainly do a lot worse than him this week. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I like it. I think I'd probably go the 2 backs over.
I think I would too.
Yeah. All right. That catches us up on the chat for Thursday night questions. Mike Gonzalez, he's been a regular on here this year. He's got Monty in the revenge game against the Bears or Pollard in a tough matchup. This is an interesting one.
Monty in a revenge game I like this one.
Yeah.
He's had some dilemmas this year with very good players, which I always think are very fun ones because you don't normally get to, do comparisons like this. So we got Pollard and David Montgomery. I will punch them in here to the GLSP, to the running back comparison tab. All right. Tony Pollard, an average of 13 PPR. David Montgomery, just 9.2. We see a pretty large disparity too, Curtis, when you look at the 10 to 15 bucket down, and then you look at the 15 to 20 bucket up, where you have Tony Pollard, just 7% of his matches going beyond 20 points, just 4% for Montgomery. But the biggest difference, I would say, is that between 15 to 20, Tony Pollard gets 22% of his matches. Montgomery gets just 13. So more upside for Pollard, significantly more downside for David Montgomery. That said, though, I do think we need to take a little closer look here. So Tony Pollard against the Eagles, you see backs like him scoring in 50% of games as rushers, whereas Montgomery, and of course, the touchdowns are really going to be his calling card, 40%. So, fairly similar lines, but I think what we saw was that Pollard just had more players that kind of hit towards the top end.
To add to that, Tony Pollard has scored a touchdown in 3 straight contests now after having a little bit of a midseason lull there.
Yep.
I'm going to pull him up just in the Game Splits app just to see what he's historically done against Philly as well. In the past couple of years anyway.
Yeah, so we have seen Pollard trending in the right direction.
He's actually underperformed versus Philly.
Yep.
And we know Philly's susceptible to the pass. Let me check another tool on Monty here, because this is a tough one. I don't think just because the GLSP has Pollard with more ceiling that we should ignore Montgomery's potential ceiling, because he's obviously had plenty of ceiling games.
It's easy to think that though, but if you actually look at the progress of their season, we had one really big week in week 4 for Montgomery, but overall Pollard has had more big games, if you will, than Montgomery, and in recent games tends to have the advantage when you're looking I guess the last 3 weeks.
I'm looking here where the Bears have been susceptible to running backs has clearly been in the receiving category. 31st in rushing yards allowed over the past 5 weeks, 29th in rushing attempts. However, 3rd most receptions and they've allowed the most receiving yards to opposing backs. That screams Jahmyr Gibbs, not David Montgomery. Let's go Pollard.
Yep, I like it. Lock it in.
All right. Man, that was fast and furious.
Yeah,
Dave.
We did. So we actually had this question come in, which we answered via a different question. This was actually the first question that made its way in tonight.
Why don't we hit that? Let's wrap it up.
That.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we already answered it because we already had to look at Hall and Mitchell in comparison.
Oh, we did on Whitaker's question. You're right. Yep. Well, that's great. We've got one more. Okay, so David realizes he got his question answered, and he threw another one in here. So we've got to get him one here. Noah definitely. Brown or Brevin Jordan. It's 2 PPR premium for tight ends. My gut goes Noah Brown here. We would need to see something pretty interesting on Brevin Jordan's GLSP to.
It's actually a pretty decent outlook too from a passing game matchup rated perspective for Noah Brown.
Yeah, and we don't have Tank
as well.
We don't have Tank Dell.
Exactly.
And Noah Brown looked really good when they were missing one of their receivers in that stint over the past month. So I'm kind of leaning that direction here. We do need to double Brevin Jordan's reception projection here, though, Dave.
Yep. Even though, like, absent of the fact that you're trying to make a decision here, Noah Brown's actually just a decent option in general, I would say. So Brevin Jordan averages 1.6 receptions. Not enough to really move the needle on this in any way. I think I would actually feel pretty decent about playing Noah Brown this week. Matchup rater perspective, it looks like a decent contest for him. Hopefully you get a little bit of uptick in targets. I think that he actually could be a sneaky play for teams that are in need this week.
Okay. I like it. All right. That's clear. That is a clear recommendation. That's what we strive to do here. So, Dave, any other? Oh, got one more. They're trickling in. This is the last one, guys. We got kickoff. We got kickoff coming here. All right, Mike. Okay. McBride's on bye. So do we want Njoku?
Njoku. I'll plug it in here. But from what I've seen with the outlook for Njoku this week, and everybody knows that I love Gerald Everett. It looks definitely. Yeah. Oh, I say that, but it's actually a decent. My boy Gerald Everett comes through. But listen, I mean. It's fairly close. I think that I would be more inclined still. I'm just going to punch in Everett here. Curtis, you can give any thoughts if you have while I do a quick look up here. Oh my God. Actually, sorry. Half of Everett's matches finding the end zone. No, I don't think I'm going to let it sway me too much over the course of the season. I think you're better off if you've been playing with Njoku, and I think that's probably where we should stick. I think that's the right advice. Yeah.
I mean, Njoku's been way more involved in his offense. So I agree with that. Neither one is a home run pick. That's to be sure.
Okay.
And Whitaker says, "Go Bucks." Note in the hat here. Appreciate that, man. Looks like we got Travion back for one more year here in Columbus, so that'll be fun. We'll talk about that.
Hopefully, you have $2 million to spend, maybe plus on a new quarterback, because
I might have donated. So we're good. I've got to win Best Ball Mania now, so I can keep Travion and get a new quarterback.
Right.
All right. Well, Dave, thanks for manning the GLSP controls. As always, we are thankful for the tools we've got here at rotoviz.com to help us make these tough decisions. Thank you for the great questions tonight. and best of luck in your matchups in week 14. We'll be back for some playoff edition start sit next week.
Thank you for listening to the RotoViz